Welcome to another deep dive. I am really glad you're joining us today because um, our mission is to extract some pretty incredible insights from, well, a really fascinating short story.
Yeah, it's a great one.
It really is. It's by Uday Mukherjee, and it's titled "Marriage is Like Schrödinger's Cat." It was published in the August 26th issue of CC&D magazine.
Right, the distortion issue.
Exactly, the
Yeah.
distortion issue, which is just the perfect word for what we're doing today. Because, we're looking at how modern couples navigate commitment and the really profound anxiety that comes from looking at statistics, and ultimately how a very famous concept from quantum physics can just unexpectedly cure relationship paralysis.
It sounds kind of wild when you put it like that, but it makes so much sense when you break it down.
It really does. But before we jump into the physics of it all, I want you to just think about your own life for a second. Have you ever been like standing at a crossroads and you were just so entirely paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong choice that you decide to you decide not to choose at all?
Right, you just freeze.
Yeah, you freeze, you convince yourself that, if you don't make a move, you can't possibly fail.
Which is, I mean, it's a deeply human thing, right? It's this incredibly universal kind of paralysis. We try to map out every single potential catastrophe before we take even one step forward, especially when the stakes feel impossibly high. We try to outsmart vulnerability by just, well, refusing to participate in it.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because our protagonist's journey into this paralysis, it starts in the most mundane way you could possibly imagine.
Right, just a normal day.
Yeah. David is just at his mother's house. He's rummaging through the garage, looking for an old squash racket. He's totally off guard. And instead of finding the racket, his mother drops this absolute bombshell on him,
Out of nowhere.
completely out of nowhere. She casually mentions that she ran into his girlfriend of 5 years, Sarah, at the market. And, they had coffee. And then his mother claims that Sarah wants to settle down and get married.
Which fundamentally alters David's psychological state in a matter of, like, seconds.
Oh, totally.
He doesn't pause. He doesn't ask clarifying questions. He instantly assumes the worst. He assumes that his girlfriend and his mother are, actively conspiring behind his back to trap him.
He goes into full panic mode. And that tension, it carries directly over into his evening plans because he's meeting Sarah for dinner at their favorite Italian spot, Olive and Vine.
Such a great scene.
It is. The author paints this really beautiful, intimate picture. Sarah's looking lovely. She's in a floral dress. She's holding his hand and whispering that she missed him. She's even ordering their absolute favorite.
Yeah, the 2 glasses of Riesling.
Right. And she asks him, does he want the fettuccine and carbonara sauce or the spaghetti pesto? It's supposed to be this perfect evening.
Well,
But David's response to Sarah offering him his favorite meal is just a grumpy, incredibly hostile whatever.
he's just entirely shut down.
He is. And it's like he's walking through this emotional minefield, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his mother basically planted a tripwire in the garage, and now he's blowing up at dinner.
Right.
Why does he instantly assume Sarah is conspiring against him rather than just, communicating?
Well, we really need to look at the mechanics of what is happening to David here, because it's far more complex than him just being in a bad mood, right?
Okay.
David is experiencing something that psychologists actually call emotional flooding. His amygdala, which is the part of the brain responsible for detecting threats, has essentially hijacked his entire nervous system.
Wow. So he's literally in fight or flight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
His brain has perceived the word marriage as a literal physical threat. Like there's a predator in the room with him at the Italian restaurant. And when that happens, your prefrontal cortex, which handles logic and rational thought, it just effectively shuts down.
So he can't even think straight.
Right. He is physically sitting at the table with Sarah, but neurologically, I mean, he is fighting for his life against a phantom threat.
That makes so much sense. Because his reaction just completely defies all logic. He totally bypasses the very real possibility that his mother just, misinterpreted a polite coffee shop conversation.
Yeah.
But what's really striking to me is how Sarah handles his hostility. Because when David finally snaps and accuses her of conspiring with his mother, Sarah doesn't get defensive. She doesn't match his emotional flooding with her own panic.
No, she doesn't. And what's fascinating here is how she uses cognitive reframing to de-escalate the situation. She breaks the whole scenario down into these manageable, very logical pieces.
Right, she basically schools him.
She does. She points out that if he doesn't know the fundamental difference between a discussion and a light conversation, then it's useless to even talk to him.
I love that. She just refuses to validate his panic. She clarifies that, hey, his mother asked a couple of questions, she answered them politely, and David simply heard what his fear wanted him to hear. And then she drops the golden rule of their relationship to completely neutralize his conspiracy theory.
Hmm.
She tells him, do you know that in order to get married, both partners have to be on the same page? Obviously, we are not.
It is a brilliant psychological maneuver. By stating that they're obviously not on the same page, she takes the threat of impending marriage completely off the table.
She gives his amygdala permission to power down.
Exactly.
But, the collateral damage for the evening is already done. The food tastes terrible to them now. The romantic atmosphere is just totally shattered. They actually leave the restaurant early, and Sarah goes home with a splitting headache.
It's tragic, really.
It is. And analyzing this dinner scene, it leaves us with this massive question. Why is the concept of marriage such an intense trigger for David in the first place?
Right.
Why does just the mere mention of it cause his brain to perceive a mortal threat?
Well, to understand that, we have to look at the historical baggage these two are carrying. They aren't just two young people who casually enjoy their independence. Both David and Sarah are carrying deep generational wounds. I mean, they've been together for 5 years. They clearly adore each other, but they vehemently oppose the institution of marriage because their environment is essentially a graveyard of relationships.
Yeah, the text gives us this really bleak backdrop. Sarah comes from a broken family. Her mother is living entirely alone. David's parents are divorced, and his mother is currently living with her third partner.
Lucas, right.
Yeah, Lucas. So when David and Sarah look at the adults who raised them, marriage doesn't look like a stable foundation. It looks like a slow-motion car crash.
It does. We are looking at how empirical evidence shapes personal belief systems. When you watch the people closest to you fail at an institution repeatedly, you just naturally internalize the belief that the institution itself is fatally flawed.
So they basically equate getting married with ruining what they already have.
Right. They've equated signing a marriage certificate with activating a self-destruct sequence on their current happiness.
But they almost activated that sequence once before. The story reveals that about 18 months prior to this disastrous restaurant fight, they caught a severe case of wedding fever.
Oh, right. The friend's wedding.
Yeah. Their closest friends, Jeffrey and Jenna, were getting married. And David and Sarah were deeply involved in the process. Choosing venues, picking out the band, just getting completely swept up in the cultural euphoria of a wedding.
It's contagious.
It really is. And in that moment of high emotion, David actually impulsively asks Sarah, shall we get married too?
And Sarah's response in that flashback is incredibly revealing. She doesn't say yes or no. She tells him, let me do the planning and you do the math.
You do the math.
Yeah, she demands that they look at the hard statistics before taking a leap like that. She wants data from the Marriage Bureau to counteract the emotional high of the wedding party.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because David actually goes and pulls the data. He does a deep dive into the Marriage Bureau statistics. And initially, he finds something that should be comforting, right? He finds that the famous, constantly quoted statistic that 50% of all marriages end in divorce, it's actually a myth.
Right, the divorce rate in America is actually trending downward.
Exactly.
Which should technically be a green light for them. But human psychology rarely responds to positive trends when the baseline risk still feels unmanageable.
Yeah, because the reality he uncovers is that a 42 to 45% divorce rate is still absolutely staggering.
Yeah.
For David and Sarah, knowing that nearly half of all marriages fail is enough to completely terrify them.
And the timing couldn't be worse.
No. Because right around the time David is analyzing these numbers, Sarah's best friend Rebecca files for divorce after just 3 years of marriage. Right. That tangible, real-world data point just hits them like a ton of bricks. The wedding fever breaks instantly, and they don't bring the topic up again until his mother's meddling brings it all back to the surface.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, David and Sarah are falling into the trap of using macro data to solve micro-emotional problems.
Oh, I like how you put that.
We call this analysis paralysis. They are trying to use broad demographic statistics to protect themselves from individual vulnerability. They're looking at a deeply personal, entirely unique dynamic between two specific people, and they're trying to predict its outcome using a spreadsheet of national averages.
It is such a flawed way to approach human connection. I mean, think about it this way. David treating his unique relationship like a divorce statistic is kind of like refusing to eat at a Michelin star restaurant simply because 45% of all restaurants nationwide eventually go out of business.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. He is applying a broad, generalized environmental stat to a highly curated individual experience. The failure rate of a random diner across the country has absolutely no bearing on the meal he is about to be served, yet he is letting that macro data dictate his personal choices.
That is a perfect analogy. And honestly, listeners do this constantly. You might find yourself trying to, you know, math your way out of taking risks in your career or your creative passions or your relationship.
And what guarantees?
Exactly. You search for data to guarantee a successful outcome. But the moment the data shows that failure is a distinct possibility, which it literally always is, you freeze. David and Sarah are letting the math rob them of their personal agency. They're assuming they are just passive statistics waiting to happen, rather than active participants who actually build the relationship.
It is a suffocating way to live, just constantly bracing for a statistical impact.
Yeah.
And this unsustainable tension, it finally comes to a head with a family intervention.
The Sunday lunch.
Yes. The narrative moves to Sunday. David's mother, who is likely sensing the massive storm she caused with her coffee shop comments, invites David and Sarah over for Sunday lunch. David is fiercely reluctant. I mean, he declares he will never set foot in that house again.
Very dramatic.
Very. But Sarah, being the practical anchor she always is, tactfully steps in. She points out that avoiding his parents forever is not a viable strategy, and they need to go and settle this once and for all.
Sarah recognizes that avoidance is just another form of paralysis. Keeping the tension alive by aggressively ignoring it still allows the tension to control their lives. Confrontation, while it is super uncomfortable, is the only path to resolution.
So they go to the house, and when they walk in, they are met with the most bizarre family dynamic imaginable. It's not just David's mother and her third partner, Lucas. My jaw physically dropped when I read this. David's father, Jeffrey James, is sitting there.
Yeah, along with his partner, Miranda.
Yes. And the author makes a very specific point to emphasize that Mr. James has not set foot in this house in 7 years. So David and Sarah walk into this room, and it genuinely feels like an ambush. David is scanning the room, wondering if his mother is terminally ill or if some other major catastrophe has occurred.
Well, the presence of the father elevates the stakes immediately. This is not just a casual Sunday lunch anymore. It's an act of extreme accountability. The entire fractured history of David's family is just sitting there in one room.
And the surprises keep coming, because his mother does something entirely unexpected. She apologizes. Yeah, she openly apologizes in front of all her current and former partners for overstepping her boundaries and bringing up the topic of marriage. And this public lowering of defenses, it creates a safe space. It allows David to let go of his hostility and make a genuinely vulnerable confession.
He finally says it.
He finally admits the truth to the room. He says that he and Sarah actually want to get married, but they are absolutely terrified of losing the profound happiness they currently share.
He articulates the core paradox of their relationship right there. Their paralysis isn't born out of a lack of commitment, but out of an excess of preservation. They cherish their current state of being so deeply that they are terrified a transition to a new state marriage will act as a catalyst for destruction.
Which brings us to the ultimate climax of the story. David's father, Mr. James, who has just been quietly sipping a beer in the corner, observing all of this, he clears his throat and drops the most profound statement. He says, "Marriage is like Schrödinger's cat. You would never know whether the cat is dead or alive until you open the box."
It is such a brilliant, disruptive concept to introduce into a tense emotional standoff. He takes a conversation rooted in fear and statistics and just shifts it entirely into the realm of quantum mechanics.
Now, I do have to push back here for a second, because when you first hear that quote, it sounds incredibly clever. But does it actually serve as a valid framework for navigating human relationships? Or is this just a ridiculous, pseudo-intellectual, highbrow excuse to convince two terrified kids to jump blindfolded into the unknown?
It holds up as a completely valid framework, and the story proves it through the character of Lucas. When David's mother dismisses the cat comment as drunken nonsense, Lucas, the mother's current partner, actually jumps in to fiercely defend her first husband's logic. Lucas breaks down the actual physics of Erwin Schrödinger's famous 1935 thought experiment.
Okay, let's dive into that mechanism, because the physics here directly explain the psychology of what David and Sarah are suffering from.
Right. So in quantum mechanics, Schrödinger proposed an experiment where a cat is placed in a sealed steel box. Inside this box is a mechanism linked to a completely unpredictable 50-50 quantum event, specifically the decay of a radioactive atom.
Okay.
If the atom decays, a vial of poison is broken and the cat dies. If the atom does not decay, the cat lives. But the core principle here is the concept of superposition. According to quantum theory, until the box is opened and the system is visually observed, the atom is both decayed and undecayed. Therefore, the cat is not just dead or alive. It exists in a mathematical state of being simultaneously both dead and alive.
It exists in a state of dual reality, and mapping that onto human cognition is where the breakthrough really happens.
Yes. Lucas applies this directly to David and Sarah. He explains that their potential marriage, much like the atomic decay, has a 50-50 chance of succeeding or failing. Therefore, before it happens, before it is experienced, the marriage is in a state of superposition.
Right.
It is simultaneously a thriving, beautiful success and a devastating, painful divorce. It stays in a permanent state of psychological uncertainty until it is actually observed. And, this raises an important question for all of us about cognitive load. When you refuse to make a choice, your brain doesn't just rest. It runs background simulations of every possible disaster, the dead cat, and every possible success, the live cat, all at the same time.
We want to peek inside the box without actually opening it. We want the Marriage Bureau statistic to act as an X-ray machine, telling us if our specific cat is alive or dead before we risk opening the lid.
Exactly. But the quantum truth and the psychological truth is that the act of observing is what collapses the wave function. The environment forces the particle to pick a lane. In human terms, making a choice and experiencing the marriage is what forces probability to collapse into reality.
You can't just stand on the outside.
No, you cannot know the outcome of a relationship from the outside looking in. You have to step inside the box. You have to become an active variable in the experiment. By making the choice, you free up the immense cognitive load you were spending on worry, and you can redirect that energy into actually building the relationship.
And when Sarah hears this breakdown from Lucas, the metaphorical light bulb just illuminates. She agrees that the physics analogy makes perfect sense. She realizes the flaw in her demand to do the math. Every person is fundamentally different. Every relational dynamic is totally unique. So you literally cannot know if your specific marriage will work until you test it yourself. The macro statistics of the outside world simply don't apply to the individual isolated experience happening inside the box.
It's a complete cognitive reframe. The uncertainty they were so terrified of transform is no longer a paralyzing red flag warning them to turn back. It's just an inevitable, natural law of the universe. They realize that demanding certainty before commitment is demanding the impossible.
And the resolution of this story is incredibly satisfying because of how decisive it is. David is so deeply inspired by this realization, so freed by the collapse of his anxiety, that he doesn't even wait for the meal to end.
He just goes for it.
He does. He grabs Sarah's hand. They leave the entire bizarre family dynamic sitting there with their unfinished Sunday lunch, and David drives them straight to the nearest jewelry store to, in his own words, experiment with the theory.
It is the ultimate antidote to analysis paralysis. After 5 years of letting statistics dictate their lives, they finally choose to observe their own reality.
So what does this all mean? We have journeyed from a massive miscommunication triggered by a squash racket, through a ruined dinner at an Italian restaurant, into the suffocating dread of macro divorce statistics. And we arrived at the profound realization that uncertainty isn't a glitch in the system. It is a mandatory requirement for love. You cannot eliminate the risk without simultaneously eliminating the relationship itself.
You simply cannot math your way out of vulnerability. And, as we conclude our analysis today, I want to leave you with a lingering question drawn directly from the architecture of this story. Think about your own life right now. What box are you currently refusing to open because you are absolutely terrified of what might be inside? And is keeping that box tightly shut just another way of guaranteeing that you remain stuck in the exact same uncertainty you were so desperately trying to avoid?
A question that demands an answer. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.